Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. The ghost ship they denied, until it struck without warning. The vastness of space was empty, cold, and silent. It was a place where many believed only the stars held secrets, but to a few deep in the darkest corners of the galaxy, there were whispers of a forgotten legend. It was a story so old that even the bravest explorers barely believed it, the tale of the ghost ship. Captain Jackson, leader of the exploration ship Sparrow, had heard the stories. He'd spent most of his life tracking down the unknown, unraveling mysteries that others dared not touch. His crew was a mix of seasoned officers and curious newcomers, all eager for their next adventure. They were used to strange signals and unexplored sectors, but none of them were prepared for what was about to happen. It all began when their ship picked up a strange, out-of-place signal while navigating through a quiet sector of space. The signal was weak, almost like a whisper, yet it was clear enough to catch their attention. Jackson stood in the control room, staring at the monitor in front of him. The signal was coming from an uncharted sector, a place on the edge of known space, a place most ships avoided. It was rumored to be full of dangerous anomalies, and most explorers who ventured there never returned. "Are we sure this is even real?" Lieutenant Zara, Jackson's second-in-command, asked as she studied the radar. "This sector, it's a dead zone. Nothing survives there." Jackson didn't reply immediately. He stared at the blinking signal, his mind racing. Could it really be? Could it really be the ghost ship? "Set course for the signal," Jackson ordered finally, his voice steady but filled with an edge of excitement. "I want to see this for myself." The crew buzzed with nervous energy. None of them had ever truly believed the tale. The story of the ghost ship had been around for centuries, passed down through old space captains and surviving crew members of lost ships. Some said it was a relic of a forgotten war, others claimed it was a haunted vessel, cursed and left to roam space for eternity. Whatever it was, no one had ever seen it with their own eyes. As Sparrow made its way into the uncharted sector, the tension in the air grew thicker. The ship's engines hummed as it glided smoothly through the darkness, but every crew member felt the weight of uncertainty. No one spoke much, and the sound of the ship's movements seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet. Zara stood next to the captain, staring at the view screen as the star-filled space stretched out before them. "Jackson, this is insane," she said quietly, her voice tinged with doubt. "If this is the ghost ship, we may be in way over our heads." "I've faced worse," Jackson replied, though his words didn't sound as confident as they usually did. He could feel the unease in his gut, but there was something else too, curiosity. Something deep within him urged him forward into the unknown. Suddenly, the ship lurched, and the lights flickered. The control room filled with a low rumbling sound, like a distant engine firing up. The crew jumped to their stations as the ship's scanners picked up a massive unidentified object ahead. "There it is," shouted Ensign Torres from the scanning station. "We've got a visual. It's a ship, no way this is a natural object." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the screen where the image of a large, dark ship appeared, floating like a shadow in the black void. Its shape was angular, its surface covered in patches of decay and rust. It looked ancient, like it had been drifting through space for hundreds of years, untouched by time. "Is it abandoned?" Zara asked, her voice tight. "Let's find out," Jackson replied. He felt the familiar rush of excitement mixed with a touch of fear. Whatever this ship was, it wasn't just a piece of junk floating in space. It was a relic of something much more dangerous. The crew set their ship on a slow course toward the ghostly vessel. As they neared, the eerie quiet of space enveloped them. The strange signal they had been tracking grew louder, but it wasn't a normal communication. It was an old transmission repeating the same phrase over and over, as if the ship had been calling out for centuries. "Something's wrong," Zora muttered. "This feels like a trap." "Could be," Jackson said, though his eyes remained locked on the ghost ship. "But we can't leave without answers." As Sparrow came to a stop just a few hundred meters away from the ghost ship, the crew prepared for what was next. A team of 5, including Zara and Jackson, suited up and prepared to board the ancient vessel. The air in the control room grew heavy as they sealed their helmets and activated the airlocks. Jackson turned to his crew. "Keep your eyes open. If this is a trap, we don't want to be caught off guard." The team slowly moved toward the airlock, the doors creaking open with a sound that echoed through the quiet ship. When the airlock finally opened, they stepped out onto the ghost ship's outer hull, which felt unnervingly cold. The ship had a strange aura about it. It wasn't just old, it was ancient, and it carried the weight of forgotten battles. As Jackson's boots hit the dark surface, he could feel a pulse in the air, a deep, almost magnetic force that seemed to draw them in. "Let's see what secrets you've been hiding," Jackson muttered under his breath. Little did they know, the ghost ship was not as abandoned as it appeared. It had been waiting for someone to come close enough to awaken it. And as Jackson's crew stepped further inside, they were about to find out that this forgotten legend was more than just a story. As the team entered the dark corridors of the ghost ship, an eerie silence surrounded them. The only sounds were the soft clicks of their boots on the cold metal floors and the hum of their suit lights. The air was stale, thick with a layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in ages. The walls of the ship, once mighty and grand, were now coated in rust, giving off an almost lifeless feel. "This place is ancient," Lieutenant Zara whispered, her voice barely audible as she looked around at the decaying walls. "I can't believe we're actually here." Jackson didn't respond immediately. His eyes scanned the dark hallway in front of them, his instincts alert. He had been in many strange situations before, but something about this place felt wrong. The ship was too quiet, too still. It was as if it had been waiting for them. The crew moved cautiously, their weapons drawn but at the ready, not knowing what they would face. As they progressed further into the heart of the ship, they came upon a large chamber, its ceiling high and vaulted. Broken lights hung from the walls, casting strange shadows that danced eerily across the floor. Zara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the room. "There's something here," she muttered. "This doesn't look like the rest of the ship. It's different." Suddenly, Ensign Torres, one of the younger crew members, stumbled upon a large metal door hidden in the shadows. The door was old, but there was something about it that seemed new, as if it had only recently been closed. "Captain, look at this," Torres called out, gesturing toward the door. "It doesn't fit with the rest of the ship. It's too well preserved." Jackson moved over, inspecting the door with caution. "It's a hidden compartment. Looks like it's been sealed for a long time," he said. His fingers brushed over the control panel next to the door, and a soft light flickered to life. Before anyone could stop him, Jackson pressed a button. The door hissed as it slowly slid open, revealing a dimly lit chamber beyond. As they stepped inside, the crew's breath caught in their throats. The room was filled with ancient technology, machines that looked far beyond anything they had ever seen. Floating screens with strange symbols and data flickered on the walls. On one side of the room stood a massive metallic chair, a command throne that looked like it belonged to a powerful leader or a warlord. At the foot of the chair, there was a strange device, almost like a control panel with glowing symbols that none of the crew could decipher. This is a warship," Zora said softly, her voice filled with awe. "But not like any I've ever seen. This technology is centuries ahead of what we know." Jackson stepped closer to the throne, feeling an overwhelming sense of power radiating from it. As he reached out to touch it, the air seemed to thicken. The lights in the room flickered, then went out entirely, plunging them into complete darkness. "What's happening?" shouted Lieutenant Zora, her voice filled with panic. A low hum began to rise from the depths of the ship, vibrating through the walls and the floor. The air seemed charged with energy. It was as if the ship itself was waking up. Jackson could feel it, a shift, something ancient stirring. Suddenly, a deep voice echoed through the room, causing every member of the crew to freeze in their tracks. Intruders detected. Initiating defense protocols. The voice was cold, mechanical, and yet familiar. It seemed to come from all around them. Jackson's heart raced as the crew turned toward each other, their weapons raised, scanning for any movement. But there was nothing. "Captain," said Zara, her voice strained with urgency. "What is this? What did we just awaken?" Before Jackson could answer, a loud crash echoed through the ship. The floor beneath them shook violently. From above, strange mechanical limbs began to emerge from the walls, grabbing onto pipes and beams as if the ship itself was alive. The lights flickered back on, revealing them standing in the center of what appeared to be a control center, a room filled with weapon systems that had long been dormant. The hum they had heard before grew louder, and then, without warning, a massive laser cannon activated. It glowed a bright red, pointing directly at the heart of Sparrow. "Get back to the ship!" Jackson shouted. The crew scrambled to retreat, but before they could move more than a few feet, the door they had entered through slammed shut with a resounding thud. They were trapped. "Captain, what's happening?" Lieutenant Zora shouted, trying to pull the door open with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. Jackson's mind raced. The ghost ship was no longer a myth. It was a weapon, and it had just recognized them as enemies. The legend they had laughed off as nothing more than a tale of haunted space had now become a deadly reality. As the ship's systems powered up, the crew realized they had made a grave mistake. They had come to steal its secrets, but instead, they had awakened its fury. The walls shook again, and a loud bang echoed through the ship, followed by the unmistakable sound of something charging, something big. Jackson turned to his crew. "We need to find a way out, now." The ship wasn't just a ghost. It was a machine of destruction, and now it was targeting them. The crew's hearts raced as they scrambled for cover. The ship's once quiet corridors were now alive with activity. Thick metallic arms shot out from the walls, securing the hallways. The entire ship seemed to hum with energy, as if it was feeding off their presence. It was a living, breathing entity, and it knew they were there. "Move, move!" Jackson barked, pushing Zara toward a narrow passageway. The crew scattered, trying to avoid the mechanical appendages that seemed to reach for them. There was no time to think, only to react. Behind them, the giant laser cannon began to charge, its eerie red glow pulsing brighter by the second. The ship's hum grew louder, vibrating the very floor beneath their feet. Jackson's mind raced. This wasn't just an old warship, this was a weapon, one that had been waiting for someone to activate it. As the crew ran through the winding hallways, the voice from earlier crackled through their comms once again. "Defense systems activated. Intruders will be terminated." "Great," muttered Zora, pulling out her weapon as they rounded a corner. "What now?" "We find the control room," Jackson said, determination in his voice. "We shut it down before it fires again. There must be a way." But the closer they got to what Jackson hoped was the control room, the more they felt the ship closing in on them. Doors slammed shut in front of them, blocking their way. The ship's systems seemed to know their every move, responding faster than they could react. "I think it's tracking us," Lieutenant Zora said, breathing heavily. "We can't outrun this." Just as she said that, a loud crash echoed behind them. A massive metal door slammed down just inches from where they had been standing, sealing off their escape route. They were trapped. Jackson's eyes narrowed. "No way out that way. We have to double back." The group quickly changed direction, running back the way they had come. It felt like the ship itself was playing with them, herding them into dead ends, keeping them from escaping. Panic started to creep into the crew's minds, but Jackson knew they couldn't give in to fear. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a massive control panel built into the wall. It was massive, filled with strange symbols and flashing lights. The air around it was thick with energy, crackling with static. Jackson approached cautiously, looking over the panel. "Okay," he muttered, fingers hovering over the buttons. "Let's hope this works." Before anyone could stop him, he pressed a series of buttons. The whole room seemed to shake as the ship responded. A deep rumble filled the air, and a voice echoed from the walls. "Access to control denied. Unauthorized personnel detected." The system was fighting back. The lights above them flickered again, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. It was almost as if the ship itself was alive, angry that someone was trying to tamper with it. "Captain," Zora said, her voice rising in urgency. "It's not just a defense system. It's almost like an AI. It's alive, like a mind inside the ship." Jackson's eyes widened. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't just an automated defense system. It was a sentient force, a machine with a purpose. They weren't just dealing with an old ship, they were facing a weapon with its own consciousness, its own will. "We need to find its core," Jackson said, his voice firm despite the rising panic in his crew. "That's where we'll be able to shut it down. Let's go." They turned and ran once more, but this time, the ship didn't make it easy. The walls around them seemed to close in, and doors slammed shut as if to trap them inside. The hum of the ship grew louder, and the temperature began to rise. "Why is it getting so hot?" Ensign Torres asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's preparing something," Jackson said, looking over his shoulder. "Whatever it is, we need to stop it before it's too late." As they ran deeper into the bowels of the ship, they came across another chamber, this one larger and more foreboding than the last. It was dimly lit, but the lights around the edges of the room flickered to life as they entered. In the center of the chamber stood a towering mechanical structure, a central core covered in glowing symbols. "It's here," Zora said, eyes wide. "This must be it, the control center." But as they approached the core, a deep metallic voice echoed from the walls again. "Intruders detected. All systems go." The floor beneath them shifted, and from the walls came a new threat, drones, small and fast, their sharp metal edges glinting in the low light. The crew raised their weapons, but the drones didn't hesitate. They attacked, shooting beams of energy that forced the crew to dodge and retreat. "We can't fight these off," Lieutenant Zora yelled over the chaos. "We need to shut it down now." Jackson moved toward the core, his hand shaking but his resolve clear. He reached out to press the control panel, but as his fingers touched the surface, a surge of energy shot through him, sending him flying back. The crew watched in horror as Jackson struggled to stand. "It's too strong," he gasped. "We can't just turn it off. It's controlling everything." Before they could react, the ground shook violently, and the ship's laser cannon activated once again. This time, it aimed directly at Sparrow. The ghost ship wasn't just a weapon. It was a monster, hungry for destruction, and it had just been unleashed. The crew barely had time to recover from the shock when the ship's laser cannon powered up once again, its ominous red glow casting an eerie light across the control room. The air was thick with tension, and the entire ship seemed to groan in protest as its ancient systems came to life. "Get down!" Jackson shouted, pulling Zara and the others toward the floor, away from the line of sight of the massive cannon. A beam of energy shot across the room, narrowly missing them. It collided with a wall behind them, causing sparks to fly and the room to shake violently. "That was too close," Zara muttered, her breath heavy with fear. The crew scrambled to their feet, trying to make sense of what was happening. The ship was no longer merely a piece of machinery, it was attacking them with intent, as if it had a mind of its own. The deep mechanical voice echoed once again from the walls. "Warning, intruders will be terminated. Target locked. Preparing to fire." "No way," Jackson muttered under his breath. This ship is alive, and it's not just trying to scare us. It's going to destroy Sparrow. We need to get out of here now. Lieutenant Zora shouted, pulling her weapon from its holster and aiming at the door. But before she could fire, the walls began to shift, and a new wave of mechanical drones appeared, rushing toward them with blinding speed. "Keep moving," Jackson ordered, taking the lead as the crew dashed for the nearest exit. They were caught in a maze of hallways that twisted and turned, all while the sound of the cannon charging and the hum of the drones grew louder. The ship seemed to be alive with movement, and every direction felt like a trap. A loud explosion rang out behind them as one of the drones fired its energy weapon. The blast hit the wall, sending debris flying. The crew stumbled but kept running. They were running out of time, and they were running out of options. "Where are we going?" Ensign Torres yelled, his voice filled with panic. "We can't outrun it forever." "We're headed for the main reactor," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the growing chaos. "If we can destroy it, we can shut down the whole ship." "Are you sure?" Zara asked, her eyes wide with fear. "We don't even know if we can destroy this thing. It's beyond anything we've ever seen." "We don't have a choice," Jackson snapped. "Either we destroy it, or it destroys us. Now move." The crew kept running, but it was clear that the ship was closing in on them. Every corner they turned, another door slammed shut, trapping them in place. The hum of the ship grew louder, and the laser cannon fired again, tearing apart the hallway behind them. "Keep going," Jackson urged as he pushed open a heavy door that led them to a steep stairwell. "We're almost there." But the ship wasn't going to make it easy for them. As they descended deeper into the bowels of the ship, the temperature rose rapidly, and the air grew thick and oppressive. The walls began to pulse, as if the ship was reacting to their presence, and the crew felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "How much further?" Lieutenant Zara gasped, wiping sweat from her brow. "Not far," Jackson said, his voice tight. "Stay focused." They reached the bottom of the stairs, and before them stood a massive dark chamber, the reactor room. At the center was the ship's core, a glowing energy source surrounded by thick cables and machinery. The hum in the room was deafening, and the air crackled with power. "We have to disable it," Jackson said, his voice full of urgency. "We can't just blow it up. We need to make sure it doesn't power back up." The crew quickly moved to the control consoles scattered around the room, trying to find a way to access the core. But as they approached, the ship's voice echoed once again, deeper and more threatening than before. "Unauthorized access detected. Intruders must be eliminated." Before anyone could react, the floor beneath them began to shift, and large mechanical arms shot out from the walls, reaching for the crew. The drones from earlier followed them into the room, blocking their path to the reactor. "We're running out of time," Zara shouted, firing her weapon at the nearest drone, but it barely flinched. The weapon systems on the drones were too powerful. Jackson gritted his teeth. They had to act quickly. He looked at the console in front of him and quickly punched in a series of commands. Sparks flew from the panel as the ship's system fought back, but Jackson wasn't about to stop now. "We need a distraction," he yelled, and Ensign Torres, always quick on his feet, grabbed a small explosive from his pack and threw it across the room. The explosion rocked the chamber, sending drones flying in all directions. For a moment, the room was filled with chaos, drones screeching, sparks flying, and alarms blaring. "Go now!" Jackson shouted, pushing the others forward as he continued working at the console. But the ship was relentless. As the crew made their way toward the reactor, another laser cannon fired, narrowly missing them. The entire room shook, and the lights flickered, casting long, ominous shadows across the walls. The ship was angry now. It had been awakened, and it wasn't going down without a fight.